Welcome to Grandpa is Him.
Several years ago, we decided to spend Thanksgiving with my parents, so we picked up some of the grandkids and we drove down to their place in central Utah. It was a beautiful, clear fall day. We were enjoying the changing leaves, the scenery, even the cool air, and we were enjoying the smell of the burning leaves as we drove through some of these small towns. We drove through one small town where one of the homeowners was burning his leaves, and my grandson in the back said, this smells good. It smells like Sunday dinner at Grandpa's house. He learned to equate that smoky smell with good tasting meat and Sunday dinner. So I want to share with you some tips and experiences on smoking meats. This week, we're going to be talking about smoking, grilling, and barbecuing and what some of the differences are. One of the things that happens when we cook food is something called the Maillard effect or the Maillard reaction. And what this is, it's a chemical reaction that occurs when proteins and sugars are heated. The result is brownness and the development of complex flavors and aromas. This is what makes food taste good. This happens on every kind of food that has sugars or proteins. For example, bread. The crust is bread. And what happens is that when these things are heated, it creates a different flavor that is very tasty. So actually, if you want good bread, eat the crust. The same thing goes with meat. If you want good tasting meat, eat the outside. That's where the real flavors come from. But that's just the precursor to what we're going to talk about today. I am happy to introduce to you Michael Waller, my son-in-law, who is an avid smoker. He knows what he's talking about, and we're going to talk about smoking and grilling today. I hope you enjoy, and I know that by the time we're done, my mouth is going to be watering. All right, Mike, thanks for joining us. First of all, let's start off by talking about what got you interested in barbecuing.
Well, you're my father-in-law, so you got feeling, to be honest. For Sunday dinners and having steaks and everything else like that, I just decided that I felt like I could increase the taste profile from just the meat to adding seasoning and doing things a little bit differently.
Well, that's not a bad way to get started. I'm dealing with the handicap or the challenge of having some people that don't like the extra flavor and they think that the meat's just fine the way it is.
Yeah.
All right. Now, briefly, what in your mind is the difference between grilling and barbecuing and smoking?
So I kind of feel like grilling and barbecuing is the same. Just grilling is with propane. Barbecue, probably it's going to be more of the charcoal briquette. And then smoking is anything to do with wood.
Okay. What is your preference?
I prefer smoking. I tend to team up my smoker with my grill. I'll do something low and slow, and then I'll finish it off on the grill as a reverse sear when it comes to steaks or chicken.
Are there times when it works better to go hot and fast, if you will, like a grill or a barbecue versus smoking? What kind of meats work better with the hot and fast?
Hot and fast, I prefer burgers that way. Maybe, chicken breasts over chicken thighs. Those, sometimes a thinner steak, something that doesn't have as much meat to it, like a London broil, the top sirloin is really good on a grill. But when you get to the low and slow, I've found, anything to do with pork, that low and slow is the way to go, or a big cut of meat, say a tri-tip or a brisket. Those are the main ones that I tend to go with for low and slow. But I do use my smoker a lot for chicken thighs. I'll set it about 350 and let it cook with the smoke.
What's the advantage of low and slow versus hot and fast? I remember one time I went to the grocery store and I picked up a nice tri-tip, and the guy behind the counter brought it out and said, "Here you go." He says, "That'll be great low and slow." And I said, this is hot and fast. And it turned out really good, but I found that at one point, low and slow does come out better. What's the difference in how the meat cooks?
I feel like low and slow, it allows the internal juices of the meat to soak in. Hot and fast, it's just making it brown.
You're right, because what we do is we try and smoke the meat at somewhere between 225 and 250, maybe 275. Now, for those of you science majors or non-science majors out there, water boils at 212 degrees. And so what we're doing is we're heating the meat to just above boiling so that the water is not leaving the meat as fast. So it tends to be more tender and a little bit slower and a little bit more flavorful because we're not cooking or boiling out all the flavor. We've talked a little bit about the differences of the grilling and the barbecuing. And what do you think are some of the essential tools that are needed for barbecuing? Let's say, well, we've got a couple of friends in common that are in their 18s to 20-year-old. They're going to be moving out sometime in the future. What would you recommend that they start out their barbecuing adventures with? What equipment?
So you're saying barbecuing, but
Well, okay, let's go with smoking. Whatever you think.
I don't suggest that someone starts out with a smoker. I feel like the best thing to start out with is just a propane grill. For someone, younger age, moving out on their own, you can get one of those little tabletop grills, propane grills that run off of the little Coleman propane tank. I think that that's the best way to start. Then from there, you would probably advance to a charcoal grill, one of those little black dome ones,
The little kettles?
the little kettles. And then from there, you start to notice the difference in taste. And then you want to explore some things. Or if you live in Texas, I lived there for a while, you don't do anything without a smoker. I mean, you get some great, they call it barbecue there, but you get some great smoked meats that just intrigue you and you want to just do it better.
Now, I don't want to argue it, but I think we need to let them know that if they get a small charcoal one, like a hibachi, where it's a rectangle, they can put the coals on one side for the hot side and then still leave the other side free for the cooler zone. What do you think?
I've seen that done. I've never had great success because of the fact that the circulation of that heat doesn't happen throughout the entire grill on those. If you do one side hot and one side on cold with no coals or anything there, you tend to get a sear on just half of that meat. And you're always having to constantly move it, and it fluctuates on the doneness.
What other tools do you think they need besides just a grill of some sort?
I found that a good meat thermometer is key. Once I learned to not grill or smoke by look and started probing the meat, trying to check temperature across multiple zones of the meat, that's when I started realizing that I was making much better food.
That is such a critical point that I don't think people understand when they start out, is that you're not cooking for the outside color, you're cooking for the inside temperature. Why the temperature? Because it doesn't matter what color it is. It has to be up to a certain point for it to be safe and for it to be done. Do different meats cook, or do they require to get to a different temperature?
Well, I mean, yeah. So beef has the tendency that you could cook it at a rare temperature, 115 to 130, and it's perfectly safe to eat. Where chicken, poultry, you want to cook that at least to 165. I don't even, when I'm smoking chicken on the smoker or grilling it, I don't pull it off until it's at least 175, 180, just to get that extra little bit of heat into the meat and have whatever fat's in there start to render.
And that's why it's so critical to be careful with your cooking temperature, because it may burn before you can get up to that internal temperature. The outside skin could be completely blackened and you're still dealing with something that's pink and runny.
Yeah. I mean, we've had that problem before, right? Like we've had some chicken early on that may have been a little bit frozen in the middle, and we're trying to cook it on the grill and put stuff on it.
Well, and you bring up an interesting point, because chicken is cooked once it is 165 to 170 internal. But because they're selling smaller and younger chickens and they're growing faster, they may be 165 degrees, but still pink in the middle, even though it's 165.
That's a great topic right there that I want to touch on. The mass-produced chicken in the world right now, if you know what goes into getting those chickens to size, that you probably wouldn't want to ingest that. I've been kind of leaning towards trying to find a more organic approach.
One of the other concerns I have is that anytime you buy any meat from the grocery store, particularly poultry, it's going to be so injected with crap. I mean, 30% water and everything else and all these other things. that may make it look good, but it kind of fights the process of smoking.
It really does, because you get some of that, the chicken breast or a whole chicken from the grocery store. It has so much water in it that as you're smoking it, you're fighting the internal temperatures the whole time, and then once it actually gets to temp, 165, 175, it's already dried out in the middle. Then it becomes not as enjoyable.
And nothing like eating charcoal that tastes worse than what you started cooking with.
Right.
Now, the other problem with the first-time griller is keeping the temperature under control, because I don't know about you, but I have never yet seen a thermometer on the outside of a barbecue or a grill that I would trust.
No.
So how do you control the temperature? How do you know what's right? Or do you bother with it? Or
On a smoker, it's one thing,
right?
right? I have one of the higher end smokers in a Rec Tech, and it has constant monitoring through a Wi-Fi signal to my phone. But when I first got it, I didn't trust it. So I went in there and I broke it. And I actually found the hot spot in my smoker first off, right? There's always going to be a hot spot in it. And so I found that hot spot, and I tend to not put anything on there unless I want it to cook faster.
You bring up a good point, and that is the idea of hot spots. Even a smoker has hot spots, because normally what they do is they've got the pellets on one side, they feed them through into a hot burning area, because you've got to burn the fuel, and anything over that pot where it's burning the pellets or whatever it is going to be hotter. So you do have hot and cold spots on a grill, no matter what kind it is.
Yeah. I mean, on your Camp Chef, you probably have that hot spot over the pot.
I do a little bit. It seems to be more towards the back left, just a little bit, not quite centered.
Okay. Mine's on the front right corner of my grill, gets the hottest. But mine also has an airflow dam through it that pushes the heat all the way through, and that's the first major turn in it.
We've talked a little bit about the meat. Now let's start talking about getting the right flavoring. Is there a particular fuel or flavor of fuel that you prefer, and how does that affect the taste of the meat?
So it depends on what you're making. So if I'm making pork, I tend to go with something that has like a fruit wood. So apple or cherry, something like that. I've had some success with there's charcoal pellets out there, adding a little bit of charcoal pellets and apple wood while smoking a pork butt. It adds an extra layer of flavor. But for steak, for beef, or for chicken, I really don't see a huge difference in the type of pellet that I use. But I don't know. I guess I don't pay enough attention to that. My rubs and seasoning that I use, overpowers that.
Okay. You talked about rubs, and that's our next topic of conversation here. Do you have a preferred recipe for a rub that you like?
So my favorite rub, I don't make any of my rubs homemade. I buy produced ones. My favorite family rub that we have here is called Casey's butt rub. And I put that stuff on everything. It's made for pork butt, but we've put it on chicken. We've put it on beef. Everything that we put that on, it comes out absolutely amazing. My kids ask me all the time to make butt chicken breast on my grill, coated with some of the Casey's butt rub.
When you put a rub on, what are the ingredients you look for in particular? Do you just go for that one can?
No, I have quite a few different spices that I run. The main thing that I'm looking for is no MSG.
Don't go there with me, because that stuff is nasty, and there's people that deny that it does anything, and they're wrong.
I get horrible migraines from it. I cannot have it in anything that I have.
Okay, you talked about spices and herbs a little bit there. Normally for poultry, you're going to want to look for something that's got parsley, sage, thyme, something that's a little bit more forward with that. For beef, you're going to be looking at something more along the salt and pepper line. For the pork, you tend to look for the fruit type flavors, not just in the wood, but in the rubs. Now, salt, when you're cooking with salt, it does two different things. Number one is when you pre-salt meat, it opens up the pores and draws the water out. The reason for drawing the water to the surface is that it moves it around a little bit better. It makes the meat more tender. And then there's also the concept of using salt as a final flavor. And you don't necessarily taste as much salt if it's pre-salted than if you put it on afterwards. So I just want to get that out of the way. Do you do a lot of pre-salting before you cook?
Never.
I find that really unusual. Even me?
Vary. Yeah, that's where we vary. I do not pre-salt anything. What I do is I take that rub that I'm going to be using. And to be honest, a lot of times when I'm smoking something, I'm using a couple different rubs that I have, and they vary depending on, the sage and herb stuff. I look for more like a cayenne, chili pepper, salt and pepper kind of mix.
Almost a Texas type rub.
Yeah, with a little bit of sweet, right? So some sugar. But what I'll do is I'll put a light layer of that on, and I'll pat it into the meat, and I'll let it sit up for about 20 minutes, and then I'll go in and I'll coat it heavy. And then if I have the time, then I'll let that sit hopefully overnight, and then put it on the smoker. That's the best that I've found.
What's the number one ingredient in most rubs?
Sugar.
And then salt or salt.
Yeah.
So in a way, you are going in and pre-salting, and that's what I wanted to bring on next, is the problem that people like me are going to have is if you pre-salt the meat and you get a nice coating of salt on it, and then you throw a rub on it, which is mostly salt, you've oversalted the meat.
Yep.
So I think that your way might be a better way to go. I have to do some more experimenting with that.
There is a difference, right? Like I've had your steaks where you've pre-salted. Your steaks tend to come out a little juicier than mine. Like you can cook a perfect medium rare steak on your grill or on your smoker, and it's so juicy and so delicious, where when I cook mine, I'm hard to get it to that medium rare. I cook it to more of a medium, and that's where I can get the juiciness. So I'm wondering if salt has it do with locking in those juices.
It might, but I find that I think the difference is that I don't do as good of a hard sear at the end as you do, because I'm afraid that if I'm going to do a good hard sear, and I use a blowtorch for my final sear, I literally have a cooking torch and I'll just run it right over the meat until it blackens up the outside. The problem is that if there's any rub left, it burns the rub.
Yeah.
So I lose a lot of the flavor from the rub if I do it that way.
I'm not going to lie. One of the best steaks I've ever had you made. You've got it down to science. I think that I have more of the Texas style.
How would you describe the Texas style?
Low, slow, salt, pepper, and over seasoned.
They love to use their oak with the wood. It's the other thing that's interesting too about cooking is that a lot of people will use like charcoal to start it and get the base fire going. So they set the temperature that way, and then they'll put 2 or 3 pieces of wood on there, whether they're oak or cherry or something else, to get the smoke.
That's something that I do want to try. Like I want to get one of those little kettle grills and get that, that nice 225 from the charcoal and just throw a couple chips on there. See what that turns out like.
Okay.
I do put the charcoal pellets in sometimes when I'm cooking stuff, and I just don't feel like I get all that charcoal flavor, which I love.
I love that too. It takes me back to my childhood. That's the problem they have with the barbecue competitions, is that what they're cooking for is for a one-bite judgment. The judge takes one bite, and it's not the kind of thing that they serve at their neighborhood barbecue. They don't serve it to their family that way. It's a very different thing. So I don't like the barbecue competitions because people think that that's the best barbecue, but it's not. It's the best single bite.
My ward has an annual barbecue competition, and I've had some people over and made them the smoked tri-tip with the reverse sear, and they love it. And one of the guys, his name is Greg. He's like my dad. I've adopted him as a family,
right?
But he actually took my method of the slow and then reverse sear, and he perfected it and turned it in, and he won unanimously with it. That was my method. I didn't have time to.
Well, and that's the beauty of this, is that everybody can share and everybody can do their own thing. Now, what's the best way to apply the rub? You already talked about putting it on for 20 minutes and then trying to do it overnight. How thick do you put it on? Because I see some of these recipes where they say use 1/4 cup. Well, crap, if I put 1/4 cup on it, it's going to have a 1/4 inch all the way around it of nothing but spices.
So I think, again, that's where we vary, right? Like you're following a recipe. I'm following touch and feel. If I can feel that meat and I can feel that it has a good amount of seasoning on it, I just leave it.
What does that feel like? Is it muddy or is it dry like sand?
It's almost like I tend to go with like 180 grit sandpaper feel,
Okay.
right? It has some texture to it. You know that there's something there, but it's not super rough, super coarse. But it's a different beast there. I go real heavy on a brisket because it sweats it all out.
Okay. I've only done the one brisket and it turned out great, but you do a good job on your briskets. In fact, there's more than one time in the last month that I've wanted a Buc-ee's brisket sandwich. What's that?
You and me both.
We had a girl that moved from California to Texas about a month ago. And we told her, listen, no matter what you do, I don't care if you die on the road, go to a Buc-ee's first and get a brisket sandwich. And she says, what's Buc-ee's? I said, I can't even describe it, but just get one. And she got one. She texted back, says, oh my gosh, now I know why.
Yeah. And I mean, that brings us to another topic, homemade versus store-bought seasoning, right? I tend to buy most of my seasonings every time I go to Buc-ee's because they have such...
Well, and you've got a good store just up the street from you, but it seems like their hours are so bad. I think they close at 5 most times, so I can never make it there.
Yeah. The thing that I like about Barbecue Pit Stop here in Lehigh, Utah, they let you taste everything. So you can taste all of the seasonings and what you want. So depending on what I'm making, I'll go in there and I'll taste 20 different seasonings to find out what I want.
This may be where we start the world on fire. Let's talk about pork ribs. Right now, there's two major thought processes here. One is that you cook them part way, and then you wrap them with foil and finish braising them. And then there's heathens like you that say no foil. Explain why.
So I do it both ways. I mean, I've tried both ways. Right now, I am on I'm not wrapping it in foil, but I will wrap it in butcher paper. I don't like the foil because I feel like all of the juices and water that's coming out of it takes away the bark of the meat.
It absolutely does, because you're softening it up.
Yeah, so me personally, if I could get it down to a science, I would probably just cook it straight through.
Okay. How long does it normally take to do a rack?
If I don't take it off and wrap it, about 4 hours.
Okay. The common method that I see these days is called 3-2-1. You cook it for 3 hours at 225, and you baste it about every half hour with applesauce or something. I'm sorry, apple juice. Then you wrap it for 2 hours, and then you finish it off for an hour. Now, during the time it's wrapped, you would normally, what I do is I put margarine on top of the ribs inside the foil to add some of the fat back in. And then I'll put a little bit of brown sugar and maybe a little bit of honey, because that gives it just that little bit sweeter flavor. But as you said, it does kind of take the bark away, but it makes for a sweeter rib. And then for the last hour, you unwrap them and let it go with some barbecue sauce, and you smoke that until it's gooey.
Yeah.
I find that the 3 hours before the wrap makes it cook too fast.
Yeah. When I do that method, I do a 2-2-1 method. So 2 hours, unwrapped, and then I'll wrap it. I do not baste it though, at all.
Okay.
When I start my rack, I will put little chunks, little flats of butter on top of it. And I just let it go for the 2 hours. I don't touch it. I don't open the lid. I don't do anything. I just let it cook. Then I'll pull it off. I'll put it into foil or butcher paper, and I'll pour just a little bit of juice in there. Some apple juice with a little bit of apple cider vinegar, and that's it. Sometimes I add a little bit of seasoning into the bottom, but I don't do the sugar.
Do you? I think your ribs are more traditional than mine in that you leave it so there's a little bit of a bite. You got to bite and pull a little bit more to get the meat off the bone. In our household here, they prefer to have the meat falling off the bone. So that's why mine go a little bit longer. I think that's the big difference.
Yeah.
the other thing is that there's 3 different kinds of pork ribs. There's the St. Louis, the full rack, and then the baby back. And they cook at different times at different speeds because they're different. They're not necessarily different cuts of meat, but they're trimmed differently. Do you have a preference for that? Which ones?
I strictly do baby back ribs. I don't do the St. Louis or the full racks of ribs. One of the things that I do want to try is I want to do some dino beef ribs at some point.
Alan King does those. He does those, and they were good, but they were, I don't know, in my mind, they were overdone a little bit because there was no pink left in them at all. And so it's kind of like it felt like a hairy brisket. Is what it felt like. Or furry.
I mean, it's a science, right? So in Texas, we had this little barbecue spot in Katy, Texas. It's called JD's Barbecue, and they sold the dino ribs. It would be first come, first serve, and they would sell out within 2 hours.
That's the place on the other side of the airport we went to that night?
No.
Oh, not that one. Okay.
No, every time we tried to go there when you were there, they were already sold out.
I just remember the night we went up for ribs, you wanted to be there at about 2:30 in the afternoon for dinner. You talked about cooking pork a little while ago, and one of the things that people like to do is cook the pork butt or the pork shoulder, which is basically the same thing. The name pork butt does not talk about where it comes from. It comes from where it fit within the process of processing pork. What is it about the pork butt or pork shoulder that you like? What do you use it for?
So I mainly use it just for pulled pork sandwiches or pulled pork. I did pulled pork nachos that a couple weeks ago that turned out just amazing. But I tend to go for the Boston butt over shoulder. I don't want to mess with the bone. All right, shoulder has, the butt doesn't.
Really? You don't like that bone? See, that's how most people tell that it's done, is if they can pull that thing out without tearing the meat apart.
Oh man, my meat probe tells me that it's done.
All right, so let's talk about the meat probe. The first time you cooked the shoulder or Boston butt or whatever it was, did you run into something called the stall? Explain what it is.
So you're cooking at such a low temperature that as the meat starts to heat up internally, it gets to a point within that meat that it's trying to break through that temperature range so it can start rendering fat. And sometimes what happens is you hit that and you don't have enough heat currently to get it to push past that. And it's called the stall for a reason, because it can stay there for 45 minutes, or it could stay there for 3.5 hours.
All right, now let me interrupt you right there. And while people are thinking 3.5 hours and it doesn't look like it's doing anything different, it's got to drive you nuts. How long does it normally take to cook a pork like that?
So I have it down to a science. I cook it in about anywhere from 20 to 22 hours. I usually will throw it on about 8 o'clock at night, and I'll babysit it through the night. And then I can pull it off right around 4, 5 o'clock, depending on, I've had some that cooked a little faster. Again, it's all about the temperature, not the time.
Exactly. Now, when it's going through the stall, what do you do to try and overcome the stall? Do you just wait it out, or do you wrap?
I found that what I like to do is I just leave it alone. They have a wireless, meat thermometer that is inside the meat that I can look at it, and I just go out and I check on my pellets to make sure that I have enough fuel going into it. I do not change it. I do not take it off. I don't wrap it. I don't do any of that.
So you just touched upon one of the key things about a pellet smoker, is that the temperature is consistent. And as long as you've got fuel, it's really easy to maintain that temperature. Whereas if you're cooking with charcoal or stick burner or something else, you have to monitor that and you have to add fuel, which is going to raise the temperature and do goofy things. Now, during that stall process and when it finishes, what it's trying to do is break down some of the connective tissue in the pork. And that connective tissue becomes almost like a gelatin. And when it starts to melt down, it's magic. That's the only way to describe it. It's magic because you get this sweet, slippery, super flavor-rich content on the meat, for lack of a better description. And that's what you're looking for.
Especially on a pork butt. I know some people that pull it off at 200 some people that pull it off at 205, some people that pull it off at 198 and wrap it and throw it in a cooler and let it go through its process. I pull it at 230 degrees, and I will pull it and I will throw it into foil and I will put it in a cooler for a good hour, letting it just sweat out all the juices and then soak all the juices back up, and then I'll shred it.
You know, you bring up a good point when you talk about letting it sit there and resting, because what happens, or what I found, is that if I take a piece of meat off the grill and if I cut it immediately, the first thing that happens is all this nice pink juice just gushes out and I end up with dry meat. By resting it, you allow that juice to be recirculated within the meat to let it adjust. The meat seems to plump up a little bit. And the other thing that happens is that there's some carryover cooking that goes on, so that you might pull it at 203, but it might go up to 205 on its own. But you've got it right where you want it. I do know of people that have kept those. I will take those, I will wrap them in foil, put a towel around it, put it in an ice chest. And I've had those sit there and stay at about 200 degrees for a good 4 hours. And they taste just as good after that 4 hours as they did coming off, if not better.
I mean, I used to make it for a job for a bunch of my employees, and I would smoke it all night and throw it in a cooler. I'd be able to pull it off, first thing in the morning, 6 a.m. I just throw it in a cooler and then I wouldn't serve it until 12. And it would be still just completely juicy, flavorful, and still warm. It wasn't hot, but it was warm.
Now, do you worry about the marking of the meat, whether it's prime or choice or anything else? Do you consider that?
No, I really don't. I think that it's just marketing.
I have to agree. I think there's a lot of marketing in it, but I also find that I'm just going to get something cheaper. And one of the purposes of barbecue, particularly smoking, is you're trying to break the meat down. Now, you do need to cook like Wagyu different than you do things like tri-tip. What do you think?
Wagyu, okay.
You know what?
I have the pocketbook for Wagyu.
I remember one time I decided I wanted to send our friend, you know who I'm talking about, I think, who used to live in San Antonio, that passed away last March. And I thought, well, I'm going to do something nice for him because he's always done some very kind things for our family. So I went online to, I want to say, Snake River Farms, and I sent him 2 Wagyu filet mignons. And these were 2 4-ounce medallions. And I think the price was $150.
Yeah.
And they're very, very good, but there's no meal in the world worth $300 a pound.
No, not at all.
I do remember seeing a show called Texas Law, where they follow around the rangers and whatnot, the game wardens, and they were investigating a case where somebody was shooting across the property line, and the neighbor's herd was behind them. And the ranger didn't seem to be too excited. He says, well, if they kill a cow, they owe you a couple $1,000. And the guy says, no, these are Wagyu steer. It's going to cost him $25,000 if he kills one of those, which is just insane.
I don't understand what Wagyu is versus a ring. It just doesn't make sense to me.
The Wagyu has got a lot more small marbling through it. So it's a little bit different flavor. So it's almost like butter. So it melts at a lower temperature, and it's got that sweetness growing into it that you don't normally get from the rest of the cows. All right, unusual meats. Have you ever smoked anything that was different?
I did an elk roast one time. I tried to smoke that, and it did not cook like I thought it would.
What did you think it would do?
I thought that it would turn out more like a beef roast. Like if you've ever smoked a beef roast, they come out and they're really good. It's actually a cheap cut of meat that you can serve basically shaved beef off of.
Right.
But I cooked it to the 165 internal temperature, and I pulled it off, and it was like beef jerky. It was horrible because the elk doesn't have fat to it.
Same thing with deer. Yep.
Yeah, that was the main thing that I didn't recognize at that time, was that I needed the fat to replenish the juices within the meat.
Yeah, for venison or something, I don't think I'd take it over 130, and even then I'd be really careful. I might just take it to 125 or so and then let it slow cook on its own. Some game meats are tough.
I tried steak and it still was awful because it just doesn't have anything. I tried doing steak wrapped in bacon and bacon burnt, and I haven't had a lot of luck in the wild game side of cooking or smoking meat.
Did you have a drip pen underneath it with some water in it?
Yeah.
Oh, I would have thought that would have helped, because that would help keep it a little bit moister. All right, here's a question for you. Have you ever tried smoking cheeses?
It's on my list to do. I've had smoked cheese, but right now I probably need to do it here soon if I'm going to do it, because it's still cold out here. But it makes me nervous, to be honest.
I tried it here once, and the problem is that out in the sun, my barbecue, just from the metal cover and the sun, will top 100 degrees. And for smoked cheese, you want to try and keep it below 80 degrees or 70, so you can put it into an ice bath.
I've heard about the ice bath, and
I don't want to do that.
I don't want to do that. Just what I found is I can if I want something with a smoked cheese flavor, I'll just take that cheese and put it in a dish and smoke it and have it melt.
The other thing that you will absolutely hate is if you smoke cheese and you try and eat it that day, it tastes like you're looking at charcoal briquette.
You definitely cannot with cheese. I had a coworker that got a brand new Traeger and wanted to do it. He did a really good job, but he brought it in the next day and it was pungent. It was horrible. But then he brought in some from the same batch like 2 weeks later, and it was amazing.
Yeah. Now, have you tried smoking salmon?
No, we don't do seafood in this house.
That's not seafood. That's fresh water.
We don't do fish.
Salmon, smoked salmon with a maple syrup and orange marinade is amazing. Now,
Take your word.
Have you tried smoking bacon?
No.
Okay. I've done that a couple of times, and you get a pork belly from the store, which is inexpensive. You have to trim off that real thick fat cap, that gooey like skin fat.
Yeah.
And then you marinate it for, I want to say 3 or 4 days with some curing salt, and then you put it on and smoke it. And that is some of the best bacon you'll ever have, because you can control the flavor a little bit more. Mine tends to have less of a salt flavor than it does off the shelf. So it's a little bit milder that way. And then you've got the maple syrup running through it. So it's pretty good. And there's a lot of people that'll do like pepper and some of the other flavors.
Yeah.
What's your favorite meat to barbecue or smoke?
My favorite thing to cook is probably a whole chicken. It turns out amazing.
You just want to say that word, spatchcock.
I cut the backbone out of it and then lay it face down, and I cook it about 275 and just let it go low and slow, and it comes out. It's to die for.
I've got a small turkey in the freezer that we bought last Thanksgiving. I think it's about a 12-pounder. That's sometime maybe for Easter, I'm going to spatchcock it and smoke it. For those of you who are curious, just look up spatchcocking. It's not at all what it sounds like. You literally are removing the backbone and breaking the bird in half. That's probably the best way to describe it. The advantage you have there is that you are cooking the meat and it comes out more evenly, because you get the breast, which has a different temperature than the thighs. The thighs and the legs have to go a little bit hotter.
And you don't have that dreaded, cavity in the middle that traps heat and then doesn't allow parts of it to cook and parts of it to cook. I've found at least on my whole chickens, I actually try to remove the ribs.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I found that it actually cooks a lot better and that my breasts come out a lot juicier.
I'll have to try that. Now, the one thing I hate almost more than anything else, is this idea of these beer can chickens. Are you familiar with that? Well, all right. Tell me about it, and I'll tell you why I think it's dumb.
It's freaking amazing. It's so good.
All right, so tell everybody what it is and why you like it.
So it's called canned chicken, but I haven't had it without, beer. But you take your chicken and you put it on this tube, basically, and that tube is filled with a bunch of liquid. And what happens is, as it cooks, that all of that liquid evaporates and it goes through the meat, and the meat comes out extremely juicy, extremely flavorful. Whatever that you put in there for the liquid, it really comes through in the meat.
Okay. Here's the thing I don't like about that is what temperature does it boil? 212 degrees.
Yeah, but you generally cook those at like 350.
All right. See, I've never heard of that. I've always heard of it doing low and slow. And if you do it low and slow, you never get it to boil and steam the meat.
No, every time I've had it, it's cooked at like 300 or 350. So a higher temperature range.
Do you recommend that over a spatchcock bird or just different?
It's just different. I like the spatchcock bird because I can really get in there and put my rub all over the chicken, basically. And let it.
I know your family loves that because for the Thanksgiving and other poultry, you guys like to put the rub and the stuffing underneath the skin and all kinds of stuff. I think you buy your Thanksgiving stuffing by the pound. So where the rest of us are looking for these small little 4-ounce cans, you guys are just saying, let's go to Costco and let's double up.
I give that to my wife. You know, she found a really good recipe for a rub for a turkey, and I came into the marriage hating turkey, and she found it, and now I love turkey.
Now, one of the things about turkey, and it's the same thing with poultry, is the secret to making it juicy is to leave the skin on, because the skin has got so much fat in it. When it heats up, it melts the fat into the meat.
But there's the difference there, right? Like just taking a turkey out of the wrapping and washing it and stuffing it and putting, butter on the skin, that doesn't do it. You have to pull that skin away from the meat. You have to separate it in order to get those juices to stay trapped in there.
In fact, in competition cooking, when they're doing the barbecue, they'll do thighs because the dark meat's got a lot of flavor, and they literally will take the skin off of the thigh. They will scrape all the fat off because they don't want to try and deal with the inconsistencies there, and put the skin back on. And sometimes they'll use a toothpick to anchor it. And it does make for some skin that you can bite through, and the meat's good. But again, they're cooking for one bite, not for the meal. All right. On our way out, real quick question. If you could barbecue for anyone in history, who would it be and what would you make? And I think I know the answer to this, but go ahead.
Cook for my dad.
I knew it. I got you. What would you cook him?
Probably make him a reverse sear tri-tip.
There's something about a tri-tip that is just beyond amazing. It's easy to do. It's quick. The results are always wonderful. And if you ever get in a situation, the very rare situation where you got leftover, get some sourdough bread, put some mayonnaise on one slice, chop the meat up small, put a little bit of horseradish on the other side, and it's heaven.
Oh, no. Absolutely not.
And you can see why we get along so well with the smoking. All right. What's your favorite side dish to pair with barbecue? And do not tell me mac and cheese with panko on it.
No, you can't put panko on mac and cheese. It tries it out. But in our family lately, I've been smoking veggies. I take broccoli, bell peppers, asparagus, zucchini, and I will douse it in some olive oil and then lightly season it. There's a Cosmos seasoning. It's like garlic butter seasoning, and I'll put that on the veggies, and I will smoke the crap out of those things, and they get gobbled in my house.
See, the thing I don't like about that is the same thing I don't like about the cheese, and that's that the initial bite is just all smoke. I've tried to make salsa, and I've never liked the flavor of it.
My veggies don't come out with a strong smoke flavor. They come out just like they're almost like perfectly cooked. There's a little bit of char on them, but they're still soft, and they just have really good flavor to them. Another perfect side dish is do baked potatoes on the smoker.
I've done that before, and I'd love them better that way and don't wrap them. Don't bother to wrap them. You want them dry.
You don't wrap them. What you do is you poke some holes, brush them with olive oil, and then you put salt and pepper over the top of them, and then you just let them smoke. And then you pull them off, you let them rest, and they're amazing.
Everyone here except me likes to wrap them in foil, and to me all that does is steam them, and you don't really get the potato cells don't really burst and give out their flavor.
I mean, I don't lie. I'm not gonna lie. I do like a wrapped baked potato in the oven. I don't like the super dry skin, but on the smoker, you can't wrap it because you have to poke a bunch of holes in it so you get that smoke flavor to come through.
And if you don't wrap it, the potato will explode. It does that in the oven. because there's nowhere for that expanding steam to get out. It becomes like popcorn.
Yeah.
All right. Is there one last hint, trick, or piece of barbecue wisdom that you want to share with our listeners?
Don't be afraid to try it. Just go for it. Whatever you do, you're going to mess something up, but you're going to end up perfecting it to the way that you want it. And it's really worth the journey.
Thank you for your wisdom. I have found that to be absolutely true. And it's something that no matter when you start, you may never get to the point where you think it's perfect. There's always something that could be better, but everybody's telling you how great it is.
Yeah, this guy that does this podcast here got a smoker because someone else had a smoker.
Yep, you had one first. I had the barbecues, and I was doing the hot and fast, and I thought, well, I'll try this low and slow and see what happens, and I'm sure glad I did. All right, Mike, I'll let you get back at it, and we'll talk to you again soon, and I expect to have some barbecue next time I come up there. One thing you may have found out about grillers and smoke masters is there's a little bit of a competition going on. It's unwritten, it's silent, it's friendly, but everybody thinks that they have the best recipe, the best technique, the best secrets, and the best methods. And so, to settle some of these arguments, I will often ask the grandkids who makes the best meat or barbecue. Let me share with you some of the feedback that I received from some of my grandchildren. We'll start off with Blake, and I asked him, what do you like about my barbecue? Tell me about it. Do you like it?
What about it?
Do you like it?
Yeah.
Is it the best you've ever had?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you like about it?
Everything.
Okay, what's your favorite kind?
Steak.
All right. How about the meat your dad cooks?
10 out of 10, as good as yours.
Ooh, bad question. His dad has home field advantage. Okay. That's fair. All right. I just wanted to get some. What?
Especially his burgers.
Oh, he makes good burgers. Next up, we had Luke. Luke is one of Mike's sons, so I knew these answers would be a little interesting. And again, Mike has home field advantage, which becomes obvious with how long it takes Luke to answer the first question. Hey, Luke, what are you doing, bud?
Yelling at my little brother to stop singing.
All right. So, who makes a better barbecue, your dad or me?
I don't know. Depends
On what?
on what you're making.
All right. Who makes better chicken? I knew what the answer was going to be, and I figured I'd give Mike an easy one because my chicken game needs to step a couple of steps.
I'd say my dad.
Okay. Who makes better steak?
There's A1 sauce than you.
Okay. How about hamburgers?
My dad.
Okay. And what is it you like about your dad's cooking?
He seasons it.
What kind of seasoning do you like? And there you have it. Just as Mike was emphasizing the importance of a good rub, his son was noticing that it does change and improve the flavor. All right, right now I've got Caleb Smith here with me, and we're going to ask him, Caleb, what's your favorite dinner?
Burgers.
You like burgers. What burgers do you like?
The cheese meat ones.
Your dad's or mine?
Both.
Okay. And what's your favorite Sunday dinner?
I don't know.
Oh, I thought it was steak and everything else.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, you like my steak?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right, now I'm with Penny Smith, and we're going to let her have the final word. Penny, what do you think about Grandpa's barbecue?
I think it's probably the best steak I've had.
Okay, and what do you have to compare it to?
Outback Steakhouse, Uncle Mike, my dad, my other grandpa, yeah.
So you're an experienced judge on this.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. What's the best thing you like about it?
I think that you add the spices like just right.
On more than one occasion, after Sunday dinner, which usually consists of tri-tip and vegetables and some homemade rolls, we will have dessert. After dessert, the grandkids will usually ask for more meat because they enjoy it and it tastes so good. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk at you soon. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of
Grandpa is him.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion and stories, and maybe even found some inspiration for your own family adventures. Now, we want to hear from you. What questions do you have, or what topics would you like us to explore in future episodes? What stories can you share? Share your ideas. Simply visit our website at grandpaishim.com and fill out the submission form. You can also reach out to us on email at grandpaishim.com@gmail.com. We're always looking for your thoughts and experiences, so don't be shy. Join the conversation and help us create the content that matters to you and your family. Until next time, keep laughing, keep sharing, and keep those ideas coming.